In the quiet suburbs of Fresno, California, the Miller household was the kind that made neighbors feel both admiration and a touch of envy. A modest two-story home with a trimmed front lawn, bike helmets hung by the door, and the scent of cinnamon often drifting from the kitchen. From the outside, Cassandra Miller looked every bit the American ideal, a devoted mother of three, a former nursing student, a part-time youth sports referee, and someone who always had time to bake cupcakes for the PTA meetings. She was the kind of woman who didn't raise her voice in public, who smiled politely even when the world pressed in, who appeared to hold her family together with both tenderness and quiet resolve. Her husband, Daniel, was a familiar name around local soccer leagues, a former goalkeeper with a regional team, now working as a trainer at a fitness center. Together, they seemed like the archetype of small-town happiness. They had 3 daughters: Haley, their eldest, born in 2013, Madison, 2 years younger, and baby Riley, the latest addition to the family. There were pictures on the fridge, drawings of rainbows, soccer trophies on the shelves, and birthday cards taped on the hallway wall. It all looked so normal. But stories like these, the ones that look perfect on the surface, are the ones most likely to crack. People who later spoke about Cassandra always used the word composed. She didn't gossip. She kept a tight circle. She was involved, but never too visible. She volunteered at Haley's elementary school, ran first aid drills at the soccer park, and organized meal trains for other moms going through hard times. What most didn't know, what only came out later, was that Cassandra rarely spoke about herself. If you asked her how she was doing, she'd deflect, "Busy, you know how it is with kids." If you asked about her marriage, she'd smile and say, "We make it work." But by 2018, things weren't working. Daniel, as it turned out, had started seeing someone else, a coworker from the gym. It wasn't public at first. Just texts. Then longer work hours. Then a rumor passed from one soccer parent to another. Cassandra found out in the summer. She didn't confront him immediately. She just grew quieter, sharper around the edges. Those closest to her, her sister, an old friend from nursing school, would later describe this period as the shift. The way she folded laundry more aggressively. The way she seemed glued to her phone at night. The way she stopped smiling during Haley's school pickups. Then came the diagnosis. In March 2019, Madison, their sweet, wide-eyed middle child, was rushed to the emergency room after bruises started appearing on her legs and her gums bled while brushing her teeth. The news came back like a thunderclap: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Everything stopped. The community rallied around them. There were fundraisers. Madison Strong wristbands. The family spent weeks in a pediatric ward at UC Davis Medical Center. And for a while, it seemed like tragedy had brought them back together. Daniel stayed at the hospital. Cassandra read bedtime stories to both girls through video calls. Haley went to stay with Daniel's mother during the treatments. Madison responded well to chemotherapy. Her blood count stabilized. The doctors were hopeful. They planned for outpatient therapy. Cassandra posted a smiling photo of Madison with a pink scarf on Facebook with the caption, "Our fighter. Our light. We're not out of the woods, but we're walking together." But then, suddenly, she was gone. On the evening of April 13, 2019, just days after her blood markers showed improvement, Madison went into sudden cardiac arrest. The hospital declared her dead within 20 minutes. The coroner cited acute liver failure as the cause, with possible complications from medication. The family was devastated. Or at least, most of them seemed to be. Cassandra's grief was subtle. Too subtle, some would say later. She didn't collapse in tears. She didn't scream in the hospital corridor. She sat, silent, upright, holding her daughter's blanket with white-knuckled fingers. One nurse described her stare as blank but focused. A kind of alert numbness. She asked questions, a lot of them. When was the last lab test? What was the heart rate during the infusion? What sedatives were used? Doctors assumed it was the reaction of a mother in shock. But behind closed doors, it started to feel calculated. Still, the community grieved with her. Daniel and Cassandra released a joint statement thanking everyone for their support and encouraging blood donations. They celebrated what would have been Madison's 4th birthday by planting a tree in the backyard. By October, the cracks in their marriage had reopened. The grief didn't bring healing. It built walls. Daniel moved into a small apartment downtown. He still saw Haley regularly and dropped in to help with the baby, Riley, born in September 2020, but his relationship with Cassandra was fractured beyond repair. They started talking to lawyers. Divorce papers were being drafted. But then came the second tragedy. In the months following Madison's funeral, a quiet stillness took over the Miller home. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace, but a silence where people avoid certain rooms, skip certain dates, and learn to breathe around memories. Daniel was the first to pull away. He returned to his training job at the gym but stayed out late more often. When he came by to check on Haley and the baby, he no longer lingered. He no longer asked how Cassandra was doing, and she no longer offered. Cassandra, for her part, seemed to function like a clock. Waking up early, packing Haley's lunch, tending to Riley, volunteering when she could. But she no longer joined group chats with the other soccer moms. She declined birthday invites. She stopped watching Daniel's amateur league games, even though he still brought home the occasional trophy for Haley to admire. To the outside world, it looked like a mother quietly coping. Inside those walls, though, something was beginning to shift. The tension between Daniel and Cassandra grew sharper as divorce papers began to circulate between lawyers. They fought, not with shouting matches, but with long silences, subtle accusations buried in emails, and missed calls that felt more deliberate than accidental. Daniel had long suspected that Cassandra held on to things: grudges, pain, the need to stay in control. But he never expected what came next. In December 2019, during what should have been a calm holiday season, Cassandra told Daniel she wanted to try again. Not just for themselves, but for Haley, who had started asking questions. Why don't you and Daddy live together anymore? Why can't we be like Lily's family again? Daniel hesitated. Cassandra proposed something bold: another baby. A fresh start. A chance to bring joy back into the house. At first, Daniel refused. The wounds were too fresh. The trust had long dissolved. But in March of 2020, on a trip to Sacramento for a youth soccer event, something changed. They stayed in the same hotel, ate dinner together with Haley, and talked about what Madison might have become if she'd lived. That night, Daniel didn't go back to his room. By June, Cassandra was pregnant. They weren't back together, not officially. Daniel stayed at his apartment, occasionally spending weekends at the house. It was more of an arrangement than a reconciliation. But Haley was happy. She was drawing pictures of her future baby sister, placing sticky notes around the nursery with names she liked: Olivia, Riley, Sky. In September 2020, Riley Hope Miller was born. A healthy 6-pound baby with her father's eyes and her sister's dimples. The hospital visit was quiet. Daniel was present, cutting the cord, taking pictures. Cassandra held the baby close, but didn't cry. "I'm just tired," she whispered when the nurse commented on her calmness. The next few months passed without major incident. Cassandra breastfed. Daniel dropped in regularly. Haley adjusted to life as a big sister, often curling up next to Riley's crib, reading aloud from picture books. But the cracks remained. The house, once bustling with noise, was now eerily controlled. Cassandra kept schedules for everything: naps, feeding, medication, temperature logs. She monitored Riley's sleep with 2 separate baby monitors and logged everything into a notebook: how long Riley nursed, how many diapers per day, how many minutes she cried. When a family friend asked why, Cassandra replied, "After what happened to Madison, I'm not taking any chances." Then, in March 2021, tragedy struck again. It was a cold Monday morning. Haley had already gone to school. Daniel was at work. Cassandra was alone with Riley. According to her later statement, she had just finished changing the baby when she noticed Riley wasn't breathing properly. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They found Cassandra holding the infant, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. But something felt off. Riley was already cold. The room was oddly silent. No signs of panic. No mess. No scattered toys or frantic attempts at CPR. Just Cassandra, calm now, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Riley was pronounced dead at the hospital. The cause of death was listed as pulmonary edema, with possible signs of underlying cardiac irregularities. But nothing definitive. Daniel rushed to the hospital when he got the call. Cassandra met him at the door. No tears, no explanation. She simply said, "She's gone." What troubled the doctors wasn't just the death itself, but Cassandra's next action. Instead of calling family, she asked to speak directly with the medical examiner. She told staff to notify the forensic department in Fresno before they even called Daniel's mother. She insisted on an autopsy, not out of accusation, but with an oddly formal tone. Cold. Precise. "It's protocol," she said. At the time, no one questioned it. The grief of losing 2 children in 2 years was too enormous to comprehend. People brought meals, flowers, letters. The PTA fundraised for a memorial bench at the local park in Riley's name. But Daniel, he couldn't make sense of it. He started noticing things, little details that didn't feel right. How Cassandra kept Riley's room exactly as it was, crib untouched, baby monitors still on, even though the house was otherwise spotless. How she seemed more preoccupied with legal forms than with grief. How she never mentioned counseling, never cried when they looked at baby photos. 2 weeks later, Daniel told his lawyer to proceed with the divorce. No delays, no second thoughts. Cassandra didn't object. In fact, she signed the papers without comment. But the story wasn't over. Because that same month, Daniel received a call from Haley's teacher. "Haley's been having stomach aches," she said. "We think it might be stress-related." Daniel picked his daughter up that afternoon. She was pale, withdrawn, but smiling when she saw him. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think Riley went to be with Maddie?" That night, she had her first seizure. It was a Thursday when Haley collapsed. Daniel had just picked her up from school and brought her back to his apartment for dinner. They were eating mac and cheese when she suddenly dropped her fork, grabbed her stomach, and curled forward in her seat. A strange sound came from her, not a cry, not a scream, but a groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. She slumped to the floor, her body seizing. Daniel froze for a moment, stunned. Then instinct kicked in. He scooped her up, called 911, and began trying to control her shaking. Her eyes rolled back. Foam built at the corners of her mouth. And then, she stopped breathing. When paramedics arrived, her pulse was barely detectable. They rushed her to the nearest emergency department, sirens piercing the afternoon calm. Daniel followed behind in his car, heart pounding, unable to think of anything except one question. Why is this happening again? At the hospital, they worked on Haley for over 40 minutes. Chest compressions, oxygen, epinephrine. And just when the attending physician was about to call time, Haley's heart resumed. Faint. But their doctors stabilized her, intubated her, and moved her to the pediatric ICU. But the damage had been done. Haley had gone too long without oxygen. A CT scan revealed global cerebral hypoxia, severe brain damage due to lack of oxygen. "She won't be the same," the neurologist said quietly. Daniel broke down in the hallway. When Cassandra arrived, hours later, she wasn't crying. She walked into the ICU, touched Haley's hand, and asked the doctor for a full report. She didn't ask if Haley would survive. She asked when she could see the toxicology results. At the time, it felt like shock, maybe her way of processing trauma. But to the doctors and nurses who had just fought to bring a child back from the brink, it felt cold. Procedural. Clinical. Haley was transferred to a cardiac center in Sacramento for further monitoring. There, specialists implanted a pacemaker. She had lost motor function in all 4 limbs. She couldn't speak. She was being fed through a PEG tube. Her weight dropped by nearly 30%. Cassandra kept daily notes of her blood pressure, oxygen levels, bowel movements. She brought charts to every checkup. And yet, not once was she seen holding her daughter's hand without being asked. Over the following months, Haley was enrolled in a rehab program and eventually discharged to home care. She couldn't walk, couldn't speak, but her eyes moved. She blinked in response to sound. It was hard to tell what she understood, but some nurses believed she was aware. Daniel tried to visit often. But Cassandra became possessive. Too much stimulation stresses her, she said. Visits should be short. By January 2022, Haley was back in the hospital. More seizures. Vomiting. Weight loss. This time she was admitted to a children's hospital in Berkeley, where Cassandra stayed with her full-time. Nurses noted how meticulous she was, always asking about medications, writing down dosages. But she refused to sleep in the room. She stayed in a chair by the door, watching. On January 29th, a nurse noticed something odd. Cassandra had been left alone in the room with Haley for just under 10 minutes. When the nurse returned, Haley's monitors were spiking. Her breathing was labored. Within moments, her oxygen plummeted. Then, cardiac arrest. The code blue was called. They tried everything. But this time, they couldn't bring her back. Haley died that afternoon. Her chart read, cardiac arrest of undetermined cause. What followed next marked the first real moment when suspicion stopped being silent. The staff expected Cassandra to scream, to collapse, to go numb. But she didn't. Instead, she stood, walked calmly to the nurse's station, and said, "Please notify the Fresno medical examiner. I'd like an immediate autopsy." The nurse blinked. "Ma'am, we notify the local authorities. There's a process." "I know the number," Cassandra said. She pulled out her phone. Dialed. When the nurse refused to take the phone, she set it down on the counter and walked away. Doctors exchanged glances. Something wasn't right. They notified the hospital's internal review board. And that same evening, they called the Fresno Police Department. Detective Marissa Klein was assigned the case 2 days later. At first, it looked like a family tragedy, 3 children dead in 3 years. A nightmare, but a crime? Klein reviewed the hospital records, the death certificates, the toxicology panels, the medical history. Something began to take shape, a pattern, subtle, but chilling. All 3 children died under Cassandra's care. All 3 were declared healthy or recovering days before death. All 3 deaths were labeled natural with vague or conflicting causes: liver failure, pulmonary edema, cardiac arrest. But it was Haley's toxicology that cracked the case open. Ketamine, 6.5 milligrams per liter. It wasn't part of any treatment. Not administered by the hospital. Not logged in any chart. Klein contacted the medical team. "Are you absolutely sure no one administered ketamine?" "Yes," the doctor replied flatly. "That would be malpractice. And it's not in our emergency protocols." Now, they had motive. They had substance. And they had timing. Cassandra was alone in the room when it happened. On March 30th, 2022, Cassandra Miller was arrested outside her home. She was wearing a gray sweater and carrying a grocery bag. When the officers approached, she didn't resist. She simply asked, "What took you so long?" News broke within hours. Cameras outside her house. Angry neighbors shouting at reporters. Daniel, when contacted by authorities, simply said, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it." But this was only the beginning. Because when they reopened the files on Riley and Madison, what they found would turn a tragedy into something far more monstrous. The autopsy report on Haley confirmed what the hospital team already feared: no traceable natural cause of death. Yes, she had a pacemaker. Yes, she had brain damage from the previous cardiac event. But on paper, Haley should have lived longer, perhaps years longer, with proper care. What she didn't have was any reason to die that day. The presence of ketamine in her bloodstream changed everything. And it wasn't just the drug. It was the dose, a quantity far beyond clinical use. Lethal. Detective Marissa Klein requested immediate access to all prior hospital records for the 2 previous children, Madison and Riley. Until now, those deaths had been treated as tragic coincidences. Now, they were potentially part of a pattern. Klein also pulled Cassandra's digital footprint, her text messages, emails, internet searches. What she found wasn't smoking gun evidence, but it wasn't normal either. Searches like, can ketamine be traced after death? Baby stopped breathing during nap. Natural causes? How long can a child survive without oxygen? There was also a folder on Cassandra's laptop titled Medical Notes, with detailed tracking of each daughter's symptoms, every fever, rash, bowel movement, but only up to the days before they died. Then, nothing. No grief entries. No reflections. Just silence. Klein brought in forensic specialists to review the scene photos from Riley's death the previous year. Something had bothered her about the way Cassandra responded after Haley passed. That same calm detachment. The same insistence on controlling the postmortem process. The same notebook in hand. The Fresno medical examiner agreed to exhume Riley's body. It was a controversial move, rare, expensive, and painful for the community to witness. But it proved essential. Because buried under layers of tissue, within the infant's airway, they found trace particles of cotton fibers. From a cloth. Fibers matched a soft burp rag that had been found near Riley's crib, at the time, dismissed as standard nursery material. But now it was evidence. And it contained blood. Riley's DNA. The implication was horrifying. Riley had not died in her sleep. She had been smothered. Klein felt her stomach turn when the findings came in. And yet she wasn't surprised. The same pattern of proximity. The same lack of plausible cause. The same solitary witness, Cassandra. Then came the case of Madison, the first child, the one who started it all. Her autopsy had listed acute liver failure and cardiac arrest. At the time, doctors had blamed chemotherapy complications. But Klein ordered a full reevaluation by 2 independent pathologists. They didn't find ketamine. But what they did find was damage to the hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat often associated with manual strangulation. Combined with unexplained bruising along the jawline and pressure marks on the chest, the picture became clearer. Madison didn't die of leukemia. She was strangled, likely in a hospital room, likely by someone who knew exactly how long to press before nurses returned. By early July 2022, Cassandra Miller was no longer just the grieving mother of 3 lost daughters. She was now the prime suspect in a triple homicide. The charges hit the news like a storm. Local headlines read, Fresno mother accused of killing 3 children over 3 years. From PTA to prison, the dark life of Cassandra Miller. The public turned instantly. Neighbors who once brought casseroles and baby clothes were now giving statements to reporters. She was always quiet, but I just thought she was grieving. She never seemed warm. The way she spoke about the girls, it was like she was listing groceries. I saw her one morning after Madison died. She was trimming hedges. Like nothing happened. Daniel Miller, Cassandra's ex-husband, stayed away from the press. But when subpoenaed to testify, he agreed. He met with prosecutors privately first. That conversation would later become part of the trial record. There were things that never made sense to me. The way she reacted. The way she wanted sympathy, but didn't cry. I asked her once, just weeks after Riley died, if she wanted grief counseling. She said, it won't bring them back. I need to stay sharp. Daniel was also asked about their marriage. He admitted they had problems. That he'd been unfaithful. That their relationship fell apart. But he never imagined it could lead to this. Looking back now, I think she thought if the girls got sicker, I'd stay. That maybe I'd feel needed again. But the question no one could answer was why. Why would a mother, who appeared loving, present, attentive, commit something so cold? The prosecutors offered a chilling theory. They called it emotional coercion through tragedy. Cassandra wasn't murdering out of rage. She was creating crisis. Constructing a cycle of loss and grief that forced people to orbit around her. Family, community, even Daniel. Her children became tools to manipulate sympathy, prolong attachment, delay abandonment. Each child's illness gave her temporary leverage. And when that illness resolved or the attention waned, another tragedy struck. It wasn't madness. It was method. On August 12, 2022, Cassandra Miller was officially indicted for 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, Haley's first cardiac arrest, child endangerment, medical obstruction and misrepresentation. She pled not guilty on all counts. In jail, she was kept in isolation, not for her own safety, but for that of others. Other mothers inside the prison had already threatened her. Correctional staff overheard threats like, "She hurt her own babies. If they put her with us, she won't make it to trial." So Cassandra waited, alone, silent, as the system closed in. The perfect mother from Fresno, now known across the country as the Black Widow of the Central Valley. When the trial finally began in January 2023, the courtroom in Fresno County was packed beyond capacity. Reporters filled the press benches. Families of other pediatric patients Cassandra had once volunteered with sat in stunned silence. And behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass, Cassandra Miller, once praised as a mother of strength and resilience, sat in a plain beige suit, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She looked smaller than people expected. Thinner. But not broken. And not sorry. The prosecution opened with a line that would echo through every major headline the next morning. This is not the story of a grieving mother. This is the story of a woman who orchestrated the slow, systematic deaths of her own children, one by one, for control, sympathy, and power. The words settled heavily into the room. Over the next 14 months, the courtroom would hear from nearly 60 witnesses, including hospital staff, forensic experts, school counselors, first responders, and, most painfully, from Cassandra's former husband, Daniel Miller. But it was the psychological profile of Cassandra that prosecutors knew would either seal or sink the case. They brought in Dr. Meredith Chong, a clinical forensic psychiatrist who had reviewed Cassandra's interviews, digital activity, and medical records. What she described was chilling. Cassandra displays classic traits of factitious disorder imposed on another, historically known as Munchausen by proxy. Except this case goes far beyond fabrication or exaggeration of illness. It involves intentional harm for psychological reinforcement, for attention, sympathy, and, ultimately, control of interpersonal dynamics. In simpler terms, Cassandra made her children sick. On purpose. So she wouldn't be left behind. Daniel's testimony came in the second week of trial. He walked to the witness stand looking tired, gaunt, and older than his 38 years. His voice was low, steady, but thick with hesitation. He described their early life together, how Cassandra was measured, never dramatic, rarely affectionate in public, but highly attentive with the children. She was detailed to the point of obsession, he said. She logged everything, meals, naps, bowel movements. She even made graphs of their fevers on her laptop. He paused. At first, I thought it was just how she coped. But over time, it started to feel like she needed the kids to stay sick. Especially when I tried to leave. Daniel then recounted the days after Madison's diagnosis and how the marriage briefly improved. She seemed recentered. We were working together again. She made social media posts that got thousands of reactions. People sent us donations. I think it gave her a sense of being seen. He wiped his face with a tissue. When Madison died, I thought I failed as a father. But no, I think she never had a chance. The courtroom was silent. Then came the digital evidence. An FBI cyber investigator walked the jury through Cassandra's browser history, phone backups, and deleted messages. One text to a friend read, "They'll never leave me if I'm the one holding it all together." Another, found in the Notes app, "If they're gone, maybe I'll matter more." The defense pushed back hard. They argued that Cassandra had been failed by the medical system, that Haley's ketamine levels were the result of a hospital error, that grief manifests in ways society doesn't understand, especially in women expected to perform constant emotion. Her lead attorney, a former public defender named Edgar Lance, called her an easy target for public rage. She lost 3 daughters in 3 years, he said. Grief doesn't always cry. Sometimes it stares. Sometimes it controls things just to keep from unraveling. He emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses, the ambiguity of older medical records, and the impossibility of proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt, especially in the case of Madison, whose remains had deteriorated over time. But the prosecution had a final card. They called Nurse Linda Vargas, a veteran pediatric ICU nurse who had been on duty during Haley's final admission. Vargas had worked for over 30 years. She had seen every kind of tragedy. But what she described shook the courtroom. I remember walking back into the room after getting supplies. Mrs. Miller was standing by the bedside, holding Haley's wrist. Not checking for a pulse, just holding it tight. And when she saw me, she smiled, for half a second, before she let go. She paused, collected herself. I didn't think much of it at the time. But after what happened, I can't forget that smile. Cassandra didn't flinch during the testimony. Not when they showed the photo of the blood-stained burp cloth found in Riley's crib. Not when they played the 911 call from Daniel the night Haley seized. Not even when the prosecutor read aloud her own words from an email draft never sent. They'll forget me once it's quiet again. In April 2024, nearly a year and a half after her arrest, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, Madison, Riley, Haley. Attempted murder, Haley's cardiac arrest in 2021. Aggravated child abuse. Medical obstruction. Cassandra showed no reaction when the sentence was read. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, calling it the most disturbing and intimate betrayal of motherhood this court has ever seen. She was transferred to a maximum security women's prison in California under 24/7 protective isolation. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of bystanders erupted, some in relief, some in rage, and a few in tears. A reporter asked Daniel as he exited, "Do you have anything you want to say about your ex-wife?" He paused. "She taught me one thing," he said. "Sometimes monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they bake cookies, and smile politely, and keep notebooks." The verdict didn't end the story. If anything, it marked the beginning of a second wave, a storm of questions, disbelief, and social reckoning that rippled far beyond Fresno. 4 weeks after Cassandra Miller was sentenced, her face appeared on every major network across the country. True crime podcasts scrambled to produce special episodes. Talk shows brought in psychologists and legal experts to explain how something like this could happen, how a woman once praised for resilience, for strength, for doing it all alone, could be capable of such deliberate cruelty. The public response was fractured. Some blamed the system for not recognizing the signs earlier, for failing to connect the dots after the second child's death, for letting a woman who had lost 3 children slip through layers of medical, legal, and social review without so much as a warning flag raised. Others blamed society's worship of the supermom archetype, a toxic ideal that gave Cassandra the perfect camouflage. She didn't look evil. She looked tired, focused, dutiful. That, perhaps, was the most terrifying part. But for those closest to the tragedy, the noise from the outside world meant little. Especially to Daniel Miller, the father left behind. He withdrew from public view immediately after the sentencing. Friends said he moved out of Fresno altogether, taking only a suitcase and a photo of Haley in a wooden frame. He never gave a television interview. Never signed a book deal. Never responded to media requests. One neighbor, who hadn't seen him since the trial, recalled something he said once, quietly at the edge of a memorial service. "I still hear their voices sometimes, especially Madison. I don't want anyone to know what that feels like." Not really. The house on Sycamore Avenue, the one where the Miller family once lived, was sold within 3 months. The new owners painted the walls and removed the tree in the backyard where Madison's birthday plaque once stood. But the past lingered. Several times, neighborhood children reported seeing someone standing at the edge of the property line late at night, not doing anything. Just standing. Looking at the windows. No one ever caught the figure. Police reports were filed but no charges made. In prison, Cassandra remained silent. She never gave a confession. Never apologized. Never offered explanation. Her attorneys submitted 2 appeals. Both were denied. Guards described her as oddly consistent. She kept to herself. She didn't speak to other inmates. She read constantly medical journals, legal case files, and, notably, psychology textbooks. A prison psychologist once remarked, "She's not delusional. She's not psychotic. She knows what she did." She just doesn't think anyone else was smart enough to stop her. Cassandra's cell was eventually moved to a special containment unit for inmates who had received threats from within general population. Other mothers, many serving time for lesser neglect or addiction-related cases, saw her as a monster beyond redemption. She became a symbol, not of maternal failure, but of calculated betrayal. Meanwhile, the case began to ripple through institutions. At Children's Hospital Central California, new policy changes were rolled out. Any pediatric death under ambiguous conditions now triggered automatic third-party review, regardless of parental consent. Internal protocols were restructured. Nurses were retrained on recognizing behavioral red flags in guardians, not just patients. Across the country, state legislatures in Oregon, Arizona, and even New York introduced bills proposing Haley's Law, a provision that would require cross-referencing child death reports across counties and hospitals within a 5-year window. Because if Haley's case had been linked to Riley's earlier, things might have turned out differently. Some questioned why the signs weren't caught sooner. The overlogged documentation Cassandra kept, her need for control, her knowledge of sedatives, her presence at each death. One pediatric nurse, speaking anonymously, said, "We never imagined a mother could be the one. That's the flaw. We look for strangers, boyfriends, babysitters. Never the mom." That collective blind spot became a nationwide conversation. At Haley's former elementary school, a quiet ceremony was held 6 months after the trial ended. The staff, once told their student died of complications, now stood around a small flowering dogwood tree planted near the playground. A plaque beneath read, "In memory of Haley Miller, a bright light taken too soon. We remember." The counselor who had once referred Haley for stomach pain spoke at the event. Her voice cracked as she said, "We don't always get to stop the bad things in time. But we can promise, we will listen better. And we will never forget what silence cost this time." For many, that was the true legacy of the case. Not the courtroom drama, not the media storm, but the quiet, haunting lesson of how far someone can go when no one wants to believe they're capable of harm, because their exterior doesn't fit the mold of evil. Cassandra wasn't a shadowy figure in a dark alley. She was a woman who brought cookies to PTA meetings, who smiled in holiday photos, who posted about her daughters on social media and got sympathy emojis in return. She was the friend you felt guilty for not calling more. The tragedy was not just what she did. It was how long she got away with it. There's something unnerving about silence that follows a storm. When the verdict was read, when the cameras packed up, and when the headlines moved on to another case, what remained was quiet. A cold, uneasy quiet in Fresno. In hospital corridors. In elementary school classrooms. In homes with framed photos of children who should have grown up but didn't. The story of Cassandra Miller wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a wound. One that reminded everyone how much darkness can hide behind what we believe to be love. In the months after the trial, few people spoke her name aloud. Even fewer mentioned her children's names in public. There was discomfort, maybe guilt, maybe helplessness. Because to speak of the girls, Madison, Riley, and Haley, was to confront the truth that no one stopped it. Not in time. The memorial bench at the local park still sits beneath a maple tree. The brass plaque reads only, "In memory of the daughters we failed to protect." 3 names. No last name. No photos. Just the carving of 3 butterflies, one larger than the others. Sometimes, fresh flowers appear beneath it. No one sees who leaves them. Some say it's Daniel. Others believe it's a teacher from Haley's old school. Or maybe it's someone who doesn't want to forget what everyone else is trying to. Across the state, the case became required reading in criminal psychology programs. In lecture halls, professors asked, "At what point does vigilance become prevention?" They reviewed the autopsy reports. They studied Cassandra's behavioral patterns. They debated whether justice had been served, or if it had come too late. But none of that brought the girls back. Daniel Miller eventually agreed to speak, once. Not on TV. Not for a documentary. But in a recorded testimony given to a nonprofit foundation focused on preventing family-based child homicide. It was shown only once, during a closed seminar for grief counselors and pediatric healthcare professionals. In it, Daniel sat across from the camera, eyes sunken, voice low. There's a type of evil you can't see until it's too close. Too normal. Too soft-spoken. Cassandra wasn't a monster in the stories we tell. She was organized. Polite. She made perfect pancakes. He paused. You don't question the mother. You don't suspect the caregiver. We were all trained to look for threats outside the home. We never looked at the one rocking the cradle. The room where that recording was played, according to those present, was silent for a long time afterward. Legislators did respond. In California, the case pushed through the final votes needed to pass Haley's Law, named not for media impact, but because of a small moment buried in testimony when a school counselor said Haley once asked, "If I get sick like Maddie, will I go away too?" The law now requires any family with multiple pediatric deaths within a 5-year span to trigger an interagency medical alert, regardless of cause of death. It's not perfect. It won't catch everything. But it's something. The law passed with unanimous bipartisan support. The governor signed it on a cloudy Tuesday, with no cameras, no ribbon, no ceremony. Just a small signature that, one hopes, might save a life someday. Cassandra Miller will likely die in prison. She rarely speaks. No visitors. No letters received. No appeals pending. But inside that institution, she is no longer Cassandra Miller, the grieving mother, the respected volunteer, or the strong woman the neighborhood once whispered about. She is simply inmate #C234109. One of the guards reportedly asked her, early on, "Why do you do it?" She didn't answer. She just looked out the small slit of reinforced glass on her cell door. Unblinking. True crime stories often end with a conviction. A final gavel. A handcuffed walk through a hallway. But the real stories, the ones that matter, don't end like that. They echo. They linger in doctors who double-check now when a mother seems too calm. In teachers who ask better questions when a student draws too many black clouds. In nurses who trust their instincts when something doesn't sit right. They live in the shadows behind well-trimmed lawns and color-coded lunchboxes. In communities that promise it can't happen here, until it does. And in the quiet places, where 3 little girls, whose names never should have made the news, are now known for how they died, instead of how they lived. Narrator's voice fades to stillness. Sometimes the monsters don't wear masks. Sometimes they're the ones who tuck you in at night. And the scariest part is how long we pretend not to see them.